report in that there's been some sort of explosion at the World Trade Center in New York City.
It does not appear that there's any kind.
There was one plane hijacked, American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles, and that is apparently one of the...
We now understand that the Federal Aviation Administration is shutting down all airport airline takeoffs nationwide. All airliners nationwide.
Your name and your position on the September 11th.
My name is Dean Terry, and I, on September 11th, was an aircraft dispatcher for National Airlines. As an airline dispatcher, aircraft dispatcher, you're responsible for operational control, which is the exercise of authority of initiating, conducting, and terminating flights. So you have the big oversight of an operation of a flight or an aircraft movement event with the pilot in command. I had a wonderful position where I went into work. I would drive to the, at the time, Las Vegas McCarran Airport and park, and I'd go in through the airport and end up underneath the D1 gates, the D concourse. The weather was nice and things were not as challenging for that transition from the 10th to the 11th. So overnight was very calm and peaceful. What was different that started gave an indication that something was unique. And sometimes I explain it as there was a skin creep or a visceral feeling, was because I got a phone call from a gentleman called Udo Schlemmer from the Newark operations team. It deserves some context because Udo I would talk to often as we would start our days, because they would come in from their sleep overnight and start the day. Udo asked about all our other flights, not only his Newark departure, which was Red Rock or Flight 20. He called and said, "Dean, where is the Flight 20? And then he said, "Where are," and he went through the list of the other flights from the East Coast. That was my very first indication, and it was about the same time that the maintenance control team had a black and white television that they would just listen to the news and have for kind of in the background. And somebody had said about that time as well that a small airplane had impacted one of these big buildings in New York at the time. Very soon after, there was another airplane had hit the Skyline building, which is then when I recognized it was the World Trade Centers as a term or a definition of an entity or a building. We had what we'd call a dot matrix printer, and that thing would spin and churn, and that was where we would get our alerts and information about what we'd call notices to airmen. At the time it was called NOTAMs, notices to airmen, and that started to show movement and sounds that resulted obviously in pushing back the chair and getting up and going over and grabbing the piece of paper and reading it. And that was noted essentially, in summary, was an all airlines call. This message comes through and you go to the phone, go back to your desk, and you dial the command center and you check in. You'll hear all these airlines check in. So I dialed in, and really quickly you say National Airlines. And then you'll hear Midway Airlines, you'll hear Atlantic Coast Airlines, you'll hear the United and Americans, and it'll come in, and then you just wait till they kick off the meeting and start explaining that we have a national security issue. And they said, clearly at the time that we were closing down the National Airspaced system, and they gave a time frame by a certain time Zulu, which was about 15 minutes away, that everybody in the air traffic control environment will be telling the pilots that they're going to land as soon as possible at the nearest suitable airport that meets that airplane size and need. So any airplane flying would get a notice that everything was going to be in the ground. There would be no activity in the air unless it was military. The ability for the dispatcher for any flight across the country, and it was clearly stated that you have a chance to use your communication tools to talk to your airplanes and figure out what airport very close nearby might best suit your needs. But there was no mandate, nor was there a lot of time to talk to all the airplanes that you might be controlling as a small airline that we had. I learned about people a lot that comes back years later and still is talked about today. A pilot was very irritated with me because they were obligated to tell the passengers information about why they were not going to Las Vegas and were going to be diverted to New Orleans. They were very irritated with my response. And the response was, "Captain, you got notice from air traffic control that all airplanes were going to be landing, that the National Aerospace System is being closed. You're in it and you're to be out of it. The weather's good in New Orleans, call me on the ground." That was my first response, with a little bit of urgency, say what needs to be said, level-headed. The response that comes back through the speaker was angry, appalled that I had no interest in our customers and what they needed to know. Then the response was, "Call me when you get on the ground, you'll know soon enough. I'm busy." In that time, I relived this over and over again. I think it's quite unique. Again, we have all these lives lost and the world impact and everything that goes on here. But what comes to mind and as part of human nature is these little flashes of things. And one thing that always comes back is this conversation where I appeared to be cold-hearted and a little rough. So if you take that and analyze that, but that's what comes back more so every year, even all these years later, is that conversation with how at that time I knew enough without having details that this was a day that was going to be hard to process. In all the cases in the airline, that operational control world where the dispatchers are, you keep finding your certainties, and to have the absence of that to make decisions is really trying when you have been for many years working with facts and lining up all your facts to then have your contingency plans and your ideas for the next hour, 2, 6, or even weeks and months. But as you're working a shift like that, you have set everything up to be what you believe is perfect and right, to all of a sudden not knowing, and then you're no longer proactive. The only proactive thing that happened was thinking about we're a small airline, and if we have airplanes in 8 different places with this uncertainty, because nobody ever could have imagined that we would shut down all the airspace over the United States or in the world, or to what degree. That's unheard of. Quickly, you think about business and sustaining customers, and now it's everything's unknown. But you start gathering facts through the day, in the morning as this is happening, and you don't know anything except for my role as holding an FAA certificate, a license, you might say, but an aircraft dispatch certificate is get the airplanes safely on the ground and help them get from out of the gate through the whole flight, and we are responsible for monitoring the progress of the flight, issuing safety of flight information. Dispatchers can cancel flights. Those all types of things are happening. So the whole day is always you're in control, and you're working with a lot of bits of facts, but you're planning for contingencies. And at this point, the only thing you could do is get the airplane, make sure the pilots knew the weather was good in New Orleans or Detroit or Denver or wherever, and that you were quick to say, call me when you get on the ground. And that was about all you could do.